in a majority, despite what we saw last night, which was a number of Palestinian Israelis who were attacked in this latest continuing eruption of racial violence.
So the racial violence is, of course, very concerning, happening across Israel. But we're also starting to see retaliations. There are more rockets being fired from Gaza that are now striking Israel. And we understand that rockets have hit Tel Aviv with more casualties on the Israeli side. Can you tell us more about the events that have been happening in the last hour or so?
That's right, yes. There was another, I think a little bit earlier on in the day, there was another pretty strong strike on Tel Aviv, and one of those rockets got through, not to Tel Aviv itself, but to the suburb of Ramat Gan. There's a major explosion on a busy shopping street, or at least I don't know if it was busy, but there was a shopping street in which this rocket appeared to just rip through the front of a building. One man killed in that attack. That was after some reporting that the Israeli military had done a lot of damage to the capacity of the fighting factions within Gaza to fire such long-range rockets. So an answer of sorts to that coming from inside Gaza. And so yes, this military escalation continues. You've seen the terrible pictures coming out from inside Gaza of these massive buildings, not just the one housing the Al Jazeera building, the Al Jazeera office, but many others, as well as residential areas where families have been killed. Equally, you've seen a mounting, if smaller, death toll on the Israeli side as well, with these very, very concentrated barrages of rocket fire. So there has been some reporting about possibility of a ceasefire in the coming days. For now, at least, though, it continues.
Okay, Harry Fawcett there, keeping across the story for us from occupied East Jerusalem. We appreciate it, Harry. Thank you very much indeed. Well, Palestinians in the occupied West Bank are marking Nakba. That's the day in 1948 when tens of thousands of Palestinians were forced from their homes as the State of Israel was created. Nida Ibrahim is in Ramallah in the occupied West Bank, and she joins us now. Nida, we can hear gunfire right behind you. It seems a bit of unrest unfolding. It brings us up to speed with what's been happening since we last spoke. And what's the atmosphere like?
Since we last spoke, we are hearing that more Palestinians are coming towards this area, which is near an Israeli military checkpoint that is adjacent to an illegal Israeli settlement called Beit El. Palestinians have been protesting over the past few days, saying they want to show their frustration, their anger, that they are supporting their fellow Palestinians in occupied East Jerusalem and in the besieged Gaza Strip. But some are telling us that they are protesting because they know that they have more than enough reasons to do so. They have an Israeli occupation that they've been living under for decades. We've seen young people who do not know, and the only life they've known is the one that is under occupation. And as you just heard, Hannah, the Israeli army is using live ammunition against these protesters, who are usually only armed with rocks, sometimes Molotov cocktails, which they prepare here locally, or fireworks. But the Israeli army is using live ammunition, tear gas, as well as rubber-coated steel bullets. And these are steel bullets that could still harm Palestinians. According to medical sources, there are now 11 Palestinians who were injured by live fire in different protests, but mainly 10 of those who were injured by live ammunition are in Qusra village, which is near Nablus in the north of the occupied West Bank. And it is a place that is usually targeted by a lot of attacks by Israeli settlers. There are a lot of illegal Israeli settlements and outposts around that village. And residents usually say, the Palestinian residents, that they are helpless. They are forming committees to defend the village, to try and fend off these settler attacks. And now they are participating in this protest because they want to commemorate Nakba. They want to show the Israeli army that they are not afraid and that they are they were telling us that the Nakba is still ongoing. Now, in other locations, local sources are telling us that there is a 12-year-old boy who was shot by live ammunition in the back. We are working to confirm those reports, but usually we are seeing young people participate in these protests. These young people have been born in the 1990s. After the Palestinian Authority was established. They've seen the leaders on and on tell them that they're going to have freedom, that they're going to have a state. But the only thing they're seeing is that the lands on which this state should be established are shrinking more and more by the day.
Okay, Nida Ibrahim there, live from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. Stay safe, Nida. We'll talk to you again soon. Thank you. Now, solidarity rallies are being held across the world. This was the scene in Baghdad a short time ago. Protesters gathered in Tahrir Square to show support for Palestinians in Gaza. Some in the crowds were seen burning Israeli flags. Well, let's even go live now to Natasha Ghanem. She joins us now from Baghdad. Natasha, it seemed like quite a significant presence at that rally.
There are probably about 500-600 protesters, almost exclusively men, who answered the call by Shia cleric Muqtada al-Sadr to protest. He called on Friday for protests in every province in Iraq to show solidarity for Palestinians. And here in the capital, as I said, hundreds of mostly men turned out to show their solidarity. I spoke to a couple of protesters, definitely not this man yelling behind me, but I spoke to a number of protesters who said that they obviously feel that what's happening in the Palestinian territories is a humanitarian issue that needs the response of the international community. One man said, "I don't understand why the world is afraid of Palestinian children. I don't understand why the world doesn't understand that Palestinians deserve a dignity to live freely and deserve to have a state." There's definitely a sense of empathy also here in Iraq with the Palestinians, particularly in Gaza. They too are frustrated with the government. I spent 10 days last month in Gaza. I did a number of stories and I got a very distinct sense of what's happening on the ground there. One of the things that everyone should know as they look at what's happening there this week is that right before this conflagration began, the hope was that the Palestinians would launch their first elections in 15 years, legislative elections. People are extremely upset in Gaza with the Hamas leadership. They feel that it had failed them, and analysts told me that they believe that Hamas would have suffered great losses in Gaza had elections taken place later this month. Now, since then, the elections have been canceled. But again, people, while in Gaza, while they're quite upset with the obviously occupation and about a 15-year blockade imposed by the Israelis and the Egyptians, they won't say it publicly, but they will tell you privately they're extremely frustrated with the Hamas leadership and the inertia that it has created. With the pandemic, everything is just magnified in terms of the misery 100 times fold. We spoke to farmers and fishermen who have been errantly able to eke out a living because they're not able to export their goods because the borders have been closed as a result of the pandemic. With regard to the pandemic, not even 3% of the population when I was there had been vaccinated, and that is because in the Palestinian territory, specifically Gaza, they are relying on Israel to donate vaccinations. Not Israel, but the international community. They had hoped that Israel would donate vaccinations, but that simply has not happened.
Okay, Natasha.
There is a lot of support still among Iraqis for the Palestinians.
Okay, there certainly is. You're attracting a bit of attention there, Natasha. We're going to let you get some space. Thank you very much indeed for bringing us that update from Baghdad. Now, we are getting reports that a new barrage of rockets has been fired from Gaza towards Israel as a response to the bombing of the Jalad Tower and for the attack on a Palestinian refugee camp overnight. Let's speak to Jeremy Deere. He's the Deputy General Secretary of the International Federation of Journalists. He joins us from Brussels by Skype. It's good to have you with us here on the programme. First of all, can I just get your reaction to the bombing of the Al Jallah Tower? We've heard from the Associated Press CEO, he's shocked and horrified. What's your response?
Equally shocked and horrified and expressing outrage that once again there is an attempt to cover up what is happening in Gaza by directly attacking media facilities. This is a third attack now on a tower which houses various media. On top of that, we've recorded 30 incidents of journalists being beaten or being detained. We've had the internet shutdowns, and it's quite clear that this is an accident, that this is systematic targeting of media in Gaza in order to prevent reporting from there.
So you would think that you believe that this was an attempt to silence media voices and not accept the explanation given by the Israeli media that Hamas were hiding in that building?
Well, I mean, that's always the excuse when something like this happens. But this is now the third tower that act. How do they explain the 30 attacks on individual journalists, photographers, reporters simply doing their job? How do they explain media and others having their internet services blocked in the past few days? And this isn't, if this was a one-off incident, you might be able to say that was the case. But back in December, we put into the United Nations Special Rapporteur a complaint about the systematic targeting of Palestinian journalists by the Israeli forces throughout the past few years. So yes, we believe this is a very deliberate attempt to try to silence the story being told from Gaza.
Well, we're still waiting to hear any official reaction from the US president, from other international leaders, but one could assume it will be the same. Both sides should de-escalate. How would you advise journalists to de-escalate their coverage of what's happening in Gaza?
Well, it's not. It shouldn't be for journalists to censor themselves and de-escalate because they are under attack. But we obviously understand that in those circumstances, journalists will seek to ensure that they are safe. But it should not be just their individual responsibility. Under UN Security Council Resolution 1738, states have a duty to ensure that journalists are protected and to take all steps to avoid civilian and media casualties. And that is not happening. And when the Security Council meets tomorrow, a very clear message needs to go out to the Israeli forces that they must stop systematically targeting media.
Okay, Jeremy Dear, Deputy General Secretary of the International Federation of Journalists, thank you so much for joining us here on Al Jazeera.